Sometimes the signs are right in front of you and you don't even see them. There's a sign, 1950s style, out front of my kid's school. And until recently, it had the list of the PA day and the upcoming calendar and the parent-teacher interview. But recently, they changed the sign, and all it says on the one side is Deb Waywin, Ojibwe word for truth. Pontius Pilate, political power that be, asks Jesus, what is truth? The joke for the reader being that truth is staring Pilate right in the face and he doesn't even see it. For what Pilate wants more than anything in the world is not to find the answer to that question, but to be done with that question altogether, to wash his hands of that question, of that affair, which he in fact does a few moments later. For Pilate, Jesus is a pawn in a political game, someone to be used for his own ends as long as it serves his purposes and for no longer. If Pilate wanted to go down in history as a memorable political figure, he got his wish, but just not in the way he might have imagined. We say his name aloud most weeks in church in the creed. Suffered under Pontius Pilate. Imagine being remembered every week in every year for being the guy who did away with Jesus. And he's remembered in the creed, no less. The words that testify to what we believe as followers of Jesus, to what we know to be true. And in an act of poetic justice, the one who couldn't see the truth when it was staring him in the face is thus remembered in our statement of truth and faith. Today is our final Sunday in this November month of remembering, of putting the pieces back together. And that question, what is truth, hovers in the midst of our gathering today. You and I live in an age of fake news, of misinformation campaigns, and truth gets taken hostage or is killed as collateral damage or is wielded like a weapon to harm. On this front, those of us who purport to follow Jesus are sometimes the worst offenders. Just take a look at the cultural shorthand for how we are known. Priests as abusers, churches as places of exclusion and privilege, Christians as judges over others. We may wish to be known for reconciliation, yet the road to reconciliation passes through truth. This is why we begin services every week with an acknowledgement and thanksgiving for the land. Because it is so easy and it costs us nothing to go around asking, what is truth? Meanwhile, it's standing right in front of us, or as we've recently been reminded, silent beneath us, 6 feet under where we buried it. A seminary prof once said to our gathered class, the only way you know you're not using God to your own ends is if you're being crucified by him. We are St. Clement's, and our common life is shaped around a cross hovering in our midst. I asked our archivist, Donald Holmes, to write an article in the Anchor this week, which I commend to your attention. And I quote this small section of it. He speaks of Clement, our patron saint, who was born about 35 in the Common Era and held office from the year 88 to 99. He was a bishop. He was banished from Rome and died in Crimea about the year 101, where he worked in a stone quarry and he cultivated a ministry among the prisoners. He found upon his arrival that the other prisoners were suffering from a lack of water, and so Clement knelt in prayer. And then he looked up and he saw a lamb on a hill. And when he went to the lamb, he struck the ground with his pickaxe, releasing a gushing stream of clear water. And this miracle resulted in the conversion of many pagans and fellow prisoners to Christianity. As punishment for his miracle, he was martyred by being tied to an anchor and thrown from a boat into the Black Sea. That anchor is our cross, the symbol of the shape of our common life that has not changed since 1891. Clement had the skills and the temperament and the work ethic to rise in his profession to become a bishop. He did that for 11 years and got his photograph on a wall and his pension plan. Then something happened, and his life was thrown away in a stone quarry. And that should have been the end of it. Instead, this is where God made him into a saint. And in a quarry of stone, Clement began to forge something not for himself, but of lasting value for the reign of God. He developed a ministry among the prisoners. And the first thing he saw was that they were thirsty. And God made of his life a vessel to give a cup of cold water to some of the least of these. What is truth? Sometimes the answer to that question and your calling in life is found in a stone quarry, the place in life where you feel like you are getting nothing back. It is just hard as rock. Jesus's best ministry was in a former stone quarry. I'm not making this up. For that is where he was crucified. And outside the walls of Rome was an ancient stone quarry used for building. But in this particular section, the limestone was flawed and it was no longer good for building or quarrying. And so the Romans used it instead as a good place to throw people away. And that's where they started crucifying people, to dispose of them once they served no further purpose. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And it's here in the stone quarry where Jesus took upon himself the sins of the entire world for all time. I find it interesting that religious jealousy got Clement banished, but taking risks for the sake of the prisoners got him killed. You see, this is where his Christianity started, where following Jesus bumped up against the hard stone reality that things are not as we wish them to be. And in that moment, Clement did not cling to his title or prestige or his so-called rights. He rolled up his sleeves for the sake of his neighbors. My friends, it's gut check time in the kingdom of God. The pandemic has banished so many of us from the church building, and many of us feel like we are between a rock and a hard place. But if you look around with the eyes of faith, you will see that we are, in fact, standing in a quarry a place where God takes stones and makes of them a spiritual dwelling place. You and I are not here to make St. Clement's great again. Rather, our witness for this generation may well be this: to become a people that is not using God to our own ends, who is not in this to justify our reputation or avoid responsibility, but rather to do good to our neighbor. I close with 3 very practical ways to put that faith into action. The first, we've got an opportunity again this year to work with prisoners, particularly to work with the kids of those who are incarcerated through a ministry of prison fellowship called Angel Tree. Let's think about how we as St. Clement go back and walk in the footsteps of our founder, who, when he found himself between a rock and a hard place, tried to find a way to meet the thirst of those who were in prison. Secondly, we have an opportunity again, or maybe I should say a reanimation of an ongoing opportunity to recommit to our work with refugees. It's a long-standing commitment of St. Clement's. Claire spoke about it eloquently last week in her Remembrance Day sermon, and in particular, we're taking on a new focus with working with Afghani refugees. And quite frankly, what we decide or don't decide to do will determine the level of commitment to this that we have as a parish. Prisoners, refugees. Third way, the next generation. Today's Commitment Sunday, and while it's not the end of commitment, maybe it's the beginning of it, but today is a day in which we do some gathering in, if you will, to ask folks to think about their neighbor, about the next generation, and to think about what our faith can look like and what shape it's going to take for the next 25 years. And the way that we do that is by asking each household to think about what they can pledge for the good of our neighbors and of our ministry in the year ahead. I don't pretend to know what that amount is for you. That's between you and God. And I do know that the ministry of St. Clement's is supported not by governments, not by outside agencies, but 100% held amidst maybe by the generosity of our friends and our members. So thank you so much for being a part of this place as we walk in the footsteps of following Jesus and following St. Clement, to put our faith into action with prisoners and refugees and the next generation. Thanks be to God.